Thank you for joining us on WQPH 89.3 FM Shirley-Fitchburg, Queen of Perpetual Help, and another edition of Local Matters. We had Father Leonard Mary in Massachusetts for a long weekend, and it was filled with food and praise and worship. And one of the events was a retreat at St. Benedict's Abbey in Harvard, Massachusetts. We now take you into a question and answer session with Father Leonard Mary, who talks about his background and his encounters with Mother Angelica. Many thanks to Father Leonard Mary, his team, and all the volunteers and people who worked on making this a memorable trip. So without further ado, here's Father Leonard Mary.
Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. At the end of it all, what is going to be abstinence? Of course, what was good, but much more how we did it. That's why Jesus says is that not everyone can enter the kingdom of heaven. And so he says, some will say, Lord, Lord, didn't I act in your name? Didn't I do this and that? And the Lord will say, no, only those who did the will of my Father. What is the will of God? Will of God, okay, yeah, it does have something to do with what we do. But first of all, the will of God is to be holy. To be a holy person is to be a person who knows God's love and a person who communicates God's love. Someone who is Christ-like. And that's why with the grace in us that we're talking about, the grace in us makes us another Christ. Okay, so we are another Christ. And that's what we want to grow in. It's to love like Jesus Christ, to love the Father, to love one another. See, this is our ticket to heaven. And remember, there are many saints who struggled with sin. And many saints who had weaknesses. And they're saints in heaven. Why? Because they can love God. And they love people. And they ask for help when it was hard to love God. Next question. If a priest does not give absolution in confession, can they go to another priest for it? Alright. Most of the time, the priest is going to give you absolution. Sometimes they don't give you absolution, but there's certain reasons for that. Sometimes if we can say we're not in full communion with the church, usually this is happening because we are still in a marriage that is outside the church, and we can't receive absolution yet. There are some times even when we're in that state where we can, but that's more you and your pastor to talk about. So sometimes the priest can refuse absolution, but usually it's for a specific reason, like I said. Most of the time what I've heard is in marriage. Or sometimes it's because we don't want to get out of this. The priest may direct you and says, okay, well, I'll do this and this and that, and then you get down. Well, okay, so sometimes so is the priest. Maybe he's grouchy. Maybe he doesn't like you. Maybe he doesn't like himself. Maybe he's having problems. Well, if we discern that that's the case, then we can go to another priest for absolution. It's asking me, where are you from, and when did you know, when did you decide to become a priest? Where am I from? Okay. Now, currently I live in Irondale, Alabama, which is right next to Birmingham. But I am from Los Angeles, California. Yeah. I know all you Boston and Celtics fans love Los Angeles. Like I love the Lakers. The Celtics have the Celtics up there. No, I'm just kidding. But anyway. Remember those games? You know, you like talking that big rivalry? We were in front of the TV? Yeah. So, I just want to tease you a little bit. Okay, so I'm from Los Angeles. I was born and raised in East Los Angeles. And let's see, I lived there for 27 years before while I was a discerning to become a priest. It took a while, because I started to pray about the priesthood when I was a teenager. I was going to church, and I was kind of drawn into Catholic things and to God. And I met a good priest. His name was Father Leonard Mary. He was a Benedictine, and so he always gave me a lot of inspiration. And so then I thought about the priesthood when I made my confirmation. I was I think I was in the 10th grade or so. I took Francis as my name. When I was learning about the saints, Francis was the one who impressed me the most. And the reason is that Francis, he just wanted to live the gospel and preach the gospel. He wanted to be like Jesus, and he wanted to do it poor. And so, that was really meant to the Franciscan way of life. But that's in my heart. And of course, when you're in high school, you're an adolescent, and the girls are really nice. So they took time to discern and say, well, maybe I should be married or whatever. And anyway, as I grew older, and eventually did some college, went to go work for some years while I was discerning. And what I found is that I was just doing more. I was involved in the parish life of the church after high school. Eventually, I became involved in lay missionary groups in the Diocese of Orange County, California. So I was doing missionary work, in my vacation time and the weekends and things. And been involved in the parish. And eventually, I got to a point where that's all I was doing was working during the day. 8 to 5 or whatever. And then at night I was at the parish. On the weekends I was at the missionary group. And I just said, well, I came to a time where I said, I need more of God. I need more of His love. And then you give myself more to God. So then, that's when I knew that, okay, it was time to discern the vocation deeper. And of course I happen to have the Franciscans in my heart. So then I thought about this Franciscan order where Mother Angelica prize were, and I went and sent them an email. They contacted me within a couple of days, and we spoke over the phone, and they invited me for a visit. I went to visit. They said, okay, hey, you like it here? I said, yes, and here's an application. And then 2 months later, I was entering, and 23 years later, they were in. So, thank you. So I've been in the religious life 23 years, almost 24, and I've been a daily priest for almost 14 years. Another question here says, do you travel a lot? Yeah. Do a lot of traveling. So we're missionary. So we do go out and do parish missions, giving retreats like this, or speaking at conferences. That's just part of our way of life. And I usually do maybe 2 or 3 a year, sometimes 4, it just depends. And all of the priests do that. But so that's some of my travels. Other travels are to go for a visit my family and things, to do other things on behalf of EWT and represent them at different events and those types of things. Now, I just want to mention real quick is that, Mary had introduced Arnaldo to us earlier on. Now, part of the missionary work that we do, and most of it is through EWTN. Of course, evangelizing, spreading the word, teaching the faith through EWTN. That's our first primary apostolate as Franciscan missionaries. So that's what we do. And then we help in parishes. We staff a couple of convents where we're giving them their spiritual needs. And then we help in the diocese. But separate from EWTN, the friars also do their own media online. So we have our website, the Franciscan franciscanmissionaries.com. We have our own social media accounts, and we're on all the platforms: YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, X. We're TikTok. We're there. And the reason why we do this separate from EWTN is because we as Franciscan missionaries are separate entities from them. Our lives are devoted to serving EWTN, but we have our own identity in our own self. And so we're Franciscan missionaries, and we got to promote our own vocations. That's what we need to do. And then we do our own evangelization through the mass media, which helps us to promote vocations. Because many times you'd be surprised that the guys who serve with us, they don't find us on EWTN. They find us online or by some other means. So most of the guys who serve, they don't see us on EWTN. That's the reason. But anyway, that's just what it is. So we're out there in our location on EWTN. So I have another with me is I have two guys who work for us, lately, and they do videography and photography, they do editing and graphics work for us. And one thing that we do is we do what's called a vlog. And we have all these short videos, we have different series we have on our YouTube and things like that. But we do a vlog. And the vlog is called Outside the Friary or Inside the Friary. When we do the Inside the Friary vlog, we're telling you about what we do at home. When we do the Outside the Friary vlog, we're telling you about what we're doing outside of our friary, outside of our residence. Which is why I brought Arnaldo, so that he can shoot an episode of Outside the Friary. So we're video documenting all my travels here in Massachusetts, beginning from when I left the airport in Birmingham, and then when I went to go from Marianne, took me out for lunch, after, and I went to the nursing home, the schools, and today, this is all being vlogged. So you'll have the opportunity to see that, and go to the Franciscan Missionaries of the Eternal Word YouTube page, and usually we post this on Wednesday. Because that is the time that we put it on our social media, but that's the time that EWTN, the space that EWTN gives us to put it on their Facebook, because they share it. So anyway, that's just a little explanation on what we're doing here. So now, okay, do all EWTN priests work and live at EWTN? No. Okay, most of us do live at EWTN. Our house is there, what they call the headquarters of the Mother House. But some friars live and work at the Shrine of the Blessed Sacrament. That is an hour north of us. Mother Angelica, she originally went to Birmingham, Alabama, to bring more of a Catholic presence there in the South. If you remember when she built the monastery, it was in the early 60s. So there was, the segregation, the times of, more discrimination, and she wanted to bring God's love to the South. So that's what she did. She built Our Lady of Angels Monastery, and then God had plans for that. The plans we all know about. EWTN. Well, over so many years, the sisters, they started EWTN, they owned EWTN, and then they said, well, EWTN now has to become its own entity, its own organization. So the sisters made EWTN a labor organization, and then the sisters decided to move. So they moved an hour north to what's called Hansville, Alabama, and in faith, Mother Angelica, she built the Shrine of the Most Blessed Sacrament, and it was the call of Jesus. She was once back, this is before got there, this was 1996, and she was visiting Bogota, Colombia, where there was a shrine to the Divine Child, and she went up to pray to the statue of the Divine Child, and the statue came to life and told Mother Angelica, build me a temple. So Mother Angelica knew right away that that was her call for the nuns to leave the network and build another monastery somewhere else. So, obedient to God, and was put in contact with some wealthy people, 4 families funded the Shrine of the Most Blessed Sacrament. It was completed at the end of 1999, and the shrine last year celebrated its 25th anniversary. So it's still going, and we, our priests, we provide for the spiritual needs of the shrine and the sisters there. So we have 2 priests living there, Father Dominic and Father Miguel, and Brother Leo is also living there to help with all the pilgrim visitors. Of course, we priests at EWTN, since we're only an hour away, we can go there a couple of times a week. I'm usually there on Friday and Saturday, to of course, to help, to assist with the pastoral needs, but also to be with the friars. So yeah, we got 3 living there permanently, and then us from EWTN go and help them on a regular weekly basis. And then we have another friar now who is in Tonopah, Arizona. This is Father Pascal. And, Mother Angelica, when she started the convent there, it got really large. And in the early 2000s, there was a group of sisters, 5 sisters. They wanted to go build another foundation in Arizona. Back then, Bishop Olmsted was a bishop in Phoenix, and he was looking for sisters to come and start convents out there. There was a new bishop at the time, and so these sisters knew about it. They asked Mother Angelica. Mother Angelica, she was in stroke at the time, but they asked the elders of the community if this could be possible. The sisters said yes, and they talked to the bishop of Phoenix, and so they moved out there in 2005, and the sisters the diocese had given them at first an old retreat house, but then they were able to raise some money and build another monastery in Tonopah, Arizona, and so that's where they're currently at. It's Our Lady of Solitude Monastery, and there are 6 sisters there, and this year is the first year that we were able to give them a chaplain. So that's Father Leonard Mary. He's there with them now. So he'll be serving there for perhaps somewhere between 3 and 5 years. Let's see. Another question here. Did you know Mother Angelica? Did I know Mother Angelica? I did. But okay, I'll tell you about the first time I met Mother Angelica. This was in 1987. No, it was 1986. Sorry. It was in 1986, 4 years ago. And I was 12 years old. And she had been traveling the country fundraising. And she happened to be in Los Angeles in the summer of 1986. And my parents, who were very devout, about the faith, they knew of Mother Angelica, and she was at a local parish called St. John Vianney, and she was there to speak, and we got there really early and sat in the front. And so I remember there, she came and she was speaking about how they built a monastery, eventually WQPH. This was very inspiring. And Mother Angelica, she's tough. She's very direct. She wasn't afraid of anybody. The Mother Angelica, in her young age, she was around some characters, some tough guys, some mafiosos. So she wasn't afraid of them. Okay, and we knew that when Mother Angelica was tough. I grew up in East LA, and I knew that this was a woman you didn't mess around with. Yeah, she sees the stuff, and she knows what people. So I remember sitting there and hearing her speak, and what I really remember is that she before the sisters had this other habit, like a similar habit. Now it was just brown, it was a veil. But it was different. And they wore these huge crucifixes. It was about that big, a big crucifix. They later changed their habit around 1993, 94. they changed it back to the traditional one. But she was wearing this old big crucifix. And so here she is telling her story, and she somehow stopped and said, well, people ask me why I wear such a big crucifix. And she said, because I can't find a bigger one. I was there, a little smart aleck. I said, well, I looked at your crucifix, and then I looked at the crucifix over there on the altar, which was about that big, and I said, right there. But I don't want to say it, because I knew some kind of woman, Mother Angelica, and she was tough, So I just kept myself quiet. But I always remembered that thought in my mind, that was there, and said, but I wouldn't dare say it to her, because I know she would have beat me up or something. So anyway, so that's the first time I met Mother Angelica, and it was just a wonderful encounter to meet her. I shook her hand, and just to be in the presence of a very faithful and loving woman of God. You knew there was something special about her. So then, when I entered back in 2002, one of the first things we did as young men in formation is we went to go meet Mother Angelica. But at that time, she was suffering from the effects of a stroke she had. Mother Angelica had her first stroke in August of 2001, and it left her a little bit paralyzed for a bit. She kind of recovered out. She was able to work through it. She had an eye patch for a while, and then she was still doing TV. She wasn't afraid of doing TV, Even though she had some little paralysis and stiffness on one side of her, she still did it. She didn't care, because she loved God. So then that was August of 2001, this first row. She was still doing TV, but in December of 2001, she had a major stroke, which caused significant brain damage, especially to her verbal and her motor skills. Either touching and all that, and moving around. So she was very limited to what she could do, and she had a couple of surgeries, but she was never the same anymore. And so she would spend the rest of her life in prayer. And she couldn't talk like she did. So that's when I met Mother Angelica. It was about a year or so after this major stroke. Almost 2 years after this major stroke. So yeah, when I see her, when we go to see her, she'd be sitting there very prayerfully, looking at her eyes, and we'd shake her hand and just squeeze her hand. Yeah. So, she gave a little wink every once in a while, smile, and but again, just like I met her in 1986, same way. We knew we were in the presence of a holy person, a special woman of God. So, yeah, that's what I know. Mother Angelica. Oh, they're telling me about if there's a canonization process for Mother Angelica. Okay. Now, the church says that a canonization can officially open after 5 years. Mother died on December 27th, 2016. It's been 10 years now, almost exactly 10 years to the day. Some of those things get complicated, and the EWTN is going to sponsor the cause for Mother Angelica, because it is very expensive, and they've already started to do everything that's required. I know they have to do an official biography now, one that is sort of just neutral. There's one that Raymond Arroyo did. However, Raymond, Mother Angelica is a mother to him, and that's how he's writing the book. But you can't be biased, so you have to tell everything the way, even though he tried to do that, but he was still writing like he did right about his mom, So no, they hired somebody to make a biography, They're working on a lot of the paperwork. Some of these, we have to write up formal letters and things like that. So that's all in the process of happening. I believe that, I'm pretty sure that the sisters have, turned this over to WQPH, and so now it's just a matter of time and completion of this application. I guess that's what you call it, application process. And then they can officially present it to the Bishop of Birmingham, and then he can submit it to the United States Council of Catholic Bishops, and then the gospel goes forward. So this is something that we can see open in probably the next year, or maybe it could be 5 to 10 years. Who knows? So, yeah. So that's what it is. There have been some miracles. I don't know about all of them, but people say that they've got healings. There's been a lot of people who say they've got healings. They don't know any specific ones, but they've heard a lot of people. A lot of people pray to her. They say that they've had tremendous peace and asking for prayers. They've found it easier to pray and have a relationship with God. But there's so many people that she still continues to inspire and encourage. And so many people respond to her messages and her TV programs that are still broadcasting at WQPH. And what we know of Mother Angelica is that she was ahead of her time. Way ahead of her time. Right? So what she said 30, 40 years ago is still very relevant today. It still speaks to our hearts today. And it's a message still for even these times. He was very prophetic in how she talked about she lived. Yeah. Someone asked me, does Jesus have a belly button? It's most likely. Jesus, he's God. Yeah, he's God. He's the universe. He's the Lord. He's the divine person. But he's a human person. He's human too, and so he has a belly button. He has a full human faculty, just as we do. So Jesus, yes, Jesus is fully God, fully man. Yeah.
Thank you for listening to another edition of WQPH's Local Matters. We hope you enjoyed the broadcast and hope you have a blessed week.